As The Lighthouse began, I felt a twinge of apprehension, since it had been hyped as a revolutionary film. My concern was that I was simply in for another rehashing of the cabin fever Shining treatment. Thankfully, save for a very familiar-looking axe chase scene, the movie managed to become something far greater than I think can be comprehended on any single level of analysis. As I am interested in finding uniqueness and deep symbolism, I did not want to spend a movie analysis talking about the madness that happens when we are alone too long. Not that this isn't true, only that this is something that has been talked about to death. This is the surface story, the facade behind which our film's identity truly hides. To begin, I wish to reiterate that this is not an analysis of the plot. I will be viewing this film through the lens of a dream interpretation. Assuming that our dreamer is some real-life version of Robert Pattinson's character, what is the cause of this nightmare, and what does his unconscious have to say for itself? When analyzing dreams, it is often prudent to take the plot as the least important aspect. Often, in fact, the plot has been subconsciously added into the dream report by the dreamer themselves. And in a story as disjointed as this one, parsing out what has happened and in what order is a fool's game to begin with. No, the prudent dream analyst will first look for archetypes, symbols, and motifs, then strong motives and desires, and finally poignant phrases or direct calls to action. When these are pulled out from the dreamer's tale and shown to the dreamer, often they will provide the answers for themselves. The unconscious speaks in a language made up of these symbols and feelings, for it is not capable of explaining itself to us using direct speech. If it were, it would cease to be unconscious. To understand the dream, one must break down the symbols. So I will give fair warning for spoilers ahead. Even though this is not an analysis of the plot, this conversation will assume that the listener is at least somewhat familiar with the source material. The first and most poignant symbol is, of course, the lighthouse itself, the focus of the film and its name. A lighthouse perhaps conjures up, in our modern mind, a quaint landmark or a trip to the beach. But this is modernity speaking, for to dream of a lighthouse on a rock island in the middle of the ocean is a symbol of danger. It might as well be bright yellow caution tape elevated into an obelisk. The lighthouse is a beacon, warning sailors to beware of rocks and dangerous waters. And this leads to the second major symbol of the film, the archetype of the ocean itself. In this case, the ocean can be seen as the unconscious landscape in which our dreamer finds himself. And in the ocean there is a lighthouse, so in that ocean there is great danger. What then is in danger? It seems that in venturing into this landscape, the dreamer has put his very ego into great danger, as we shall see moving forward. The first manifestation of this danger is perhaps the third symbol that we find, that of the mermaid or the siren. In ancient mythology, the siren is a half-beautiful maiden and half a sea monster. When rising up out of the sea, she entices sexually starved sailors off of their boats and into her rocks. The sailors are then devoured or drowned. The mermaid is symbolic of that thing which we desire and covet over all considerations and at the cost of our rational faculties. This is a double symbol and something to be taken all the more seriously, as it parallels the light at the top of the lighthouse, also seen here as something to be coveted over all things. But the light is designed to deter. Being attracted to the light is a self-destructive motif, like the moth that approaches the light only to be burned. The light at top of the lighthouse has a clear meaning. Stay away. Why then is its siren song so irresistible? The mermaid has another meaning as well, one that perhaps offers a clue. She is a creature of a dual nature, half one identity, that of the maiden, and half another, that of sea monster. On one hand, she is something that can be taken and dominated sexually by our dreamer, but on the other hand, she has the power to drown and to destroy him. This leads us to the dual nature of this solitary post. Our dreamer is marooned, but he is not alone. A man with the opposite nature to himself shares the lighthouse. No, not shares, dominates. Willem Defoe has been transformed into the archetypical old man of the sea. The yarn-spinning, spitting, pissing, farting, and drinking master that the dreamer must submit to like a dog. With these major images in mind, we can begin to mine for meaning. If we had the dreamer here in the room with us, we could ask him, what do these images conjure up for you? But alas, we cannot. We are therefore forced to bend these rules a bit in order that we may establish a few concrete things about who our dreamer is and where he is on his journey in life. So I put forth the proposition then that we take Pattinson's backstory for granted and at face value. Since none of it takes place on the island itself, we can assume that none of it is part of the dream. For the sake of argument, we will say that this is the ego's memory brought with it into the dream. As Willem Defoe said in a moment of meta-understanding, perhaps none of this is real, and he is back in the forests of Canada, delirious or dreaming. Oftentimes, it is useful to take a direct statement from a dream as truth. Taking this one as true, we shall continue our analysis. What do we know of our dreamer? Before he was training to be a lighthouse keeper, he was working for the Hudson's Bay Logging Company in Canada. That is to say, before he fell into this dream, his last known identity was Tommy, the lumberjack. At the logging company, his boss was named Ephraim Winslow. He remembers this boss as being abusive and calling him dog. While pushing logs downriver one day, Winslow, the boss, fell into the log jam and called out for our dreamer Tommy to rescue him. Instead, Tommy does nothing and allows him to drown. He admits that before Winslow fell into the log jam, he had been fantasizing about pushing him in and drowning him. It's not made clear whether or not he acted on this impulse. Whether or not Winslow's drowning was an accident or a murder is left to our imagination. What we do know is that by the time he arrived at the lighthouse, our dreamer had taken the name Ephraim Winslow for himself. Curiously, it is revealed that Willem Defoe's character is actually named Thomas, our dreamer's old name. The two exchange names after a near-fatal accident where it is once again Thomas, but in this case Defoe, dangling Ephraim, now Pattinson, over the side of the lighthouse so that he can whitewash it clean. To whitewash something is of course to clean it, but the implication is often that there is something there to be covered up, or whitewashed over. Now it is the turn of Pattinson's Ephraim to fall, while the new Tommy looks on from above. There is a sense that this fall represents a death and rebirth for Pattinson. In the next scene, he demands that Defoe stop referring to him as dog and nails down his claim to the new identity of Ephraim Winslow. It's not for nothing that the old Winslow had called him dog many a time, leading to his own fall. In response, Defoe shares that his Christian name is Thomas. Is it possible that it is this Thomas and Ephraim dichotomy that is at the heart of the dream? When Pattinson either murdered or let Winslow died, he took on Winslow's identity for himself. Now that he has seized this identity, the identity that was Tommy has now become a second persona. Willem Defoe. This original personality has been pushed down deep into the unconscious. He has been banished to sea and marooned on a rock crowned with a lighthouse to warn the ego away. What is so unacceptable about this original Tommy that he has been banished in this way? Well, the film suggests a few possibilities, The most clear being the guilt itself for the murder of the original Winslow, which he cannot admit to, even to himself. The toast prayer that Defoe offers as a matter of course seems to point to this. He is the banished identity after all. Should pale death with arrow dread make the ocean caves our bed, though no eye of love might see where that shrouded grave shall be, thou who hear'st the surges roll, deign to save the suppliant's soul. A wonderful piece of poetry, but let us break it down and see what has been said. After all, when a dream says something memorable and repeatedly, this is a clear sign that it is a message from the unconscious. Should pale death with arrow dread make the ocean caves our bed? Put plainly, if death comes for us and we are drowned beneath the waters, who was drowned, if not Ephraim Winslow? Though no eye of love might see where that shrouded grave shall be. Put plainly, even if nobody we know knows that we are dead and buried. Who died without anyone being told? If not, Ephraim Winslow. Thou, who hear'st the surges roll, deign to save the suppliant's soul. Put plainly, you who hear me drowning, please save me. Who watched Ephraim Winslow drown and did nothing? The banished identity of Tommy that has manifested in this dream as Defoe is calling out to our dreamer to face what he has done before it drives him mad. For no one can survive in the state of split identity for long. And what follows is remarkable. Thomas now takes on the role of tormentor of Winslow in a direct reversal of their roles in reality. And this causes Pattinson to begin to greatly envy Defoe. He believes that Defoe is keeping something of immense value at the very peak of the Lighthouse, in the place where the danger is the greatest to the protective complex that he has established to protect himself from reality. The reality is that there is something of great value at the top of the Lighthouse, for that is the place that Defoe occupies. The thing of greatest value to Pattinson would be the rectification of his identity. But interestingly, it is Defoe himself that is most unwilling to allow Pattinson anywhere near the top of the Lighthouse. In fact, he seems hell-bent on destroying this new identity of Winslow. And why would he not? He hated the original Winslow after all, and now Winslow has stolen his identity. More importantly, as an agent of the unconscious, he is the guardian of the Lighthouse. And the Lighthouse is the representative of the protective complex that Pattinson has built to protect himself. Perhaps to protect himself from what he has done, or perhaps something even more gruesome, as we shall explore soon. But even as the complex fights back against Pattinson's attempts to scale the Lighthouse and find himself, the unconscious, as represented by the ocean, provides him another symbol and another path. In presenting Pattinson with first the scrimshaw of the mermaid and then the mermaid herself, the unconscious is screaming out to Pattinson that he is in a state of split identity. His compulsion to have sex with the mermaid is emblematic of his desire for wholeness, for a coming together, for a synthesis of opposites. It is not for nothing that in A Drunken Fog, Pattinson and Defoe come a breath away from kissing one another as they use alcohol to lower their inhibitions. But Pattinson cannot accept synthesis with this banished persona. And so what could have been a coming together in understanding devolves again into a struggle for domination. In the end, however, Pattinson gains the upper hand and beats Defoe nearly unconscious before an implied assault happens off-screen. The synthesis has been completed, but it is the new identity that has risen to the top, and the true identity that has been subordinated completely. Now Tommy is once again Winslow's dog. The image of Pattinson attempting to bury Defoe alive is perhaps the clearest image of his desperation to be rid of the old persona that refuses to die. If banishing him to an island is not enough, perhaps burying him in the ground will suffice. Anything to avoid acknowledging himself for what he is. Finally, key in hand, Pattinson makes his triumphant ascent up the spiral stairs to the light itself. But when he gazes in, it is the light itself that destroys him and the dream. In gazing into the light, Pattinson must realize that he still is Tommy. He falls down the stairs, and in his descent, I believe he is awoken. It is my belief that the haunting final shot of the movie is not part of the dream at all. Here we see the wretched man who has been dreaming this all along. He lays in Promethean glory while birds devour him alive. He has run away from the logging company because he murdered his foreman. While in the Canadian wilderness, he injured himself in some way, perhaps breaking his leg like the Thomas of his dream. As he lays on the shore, starving to death and being pecked at by the birds, this has been the dream he dreamt. The bird motif that has haunted our dreamer is thus made clear. The seabirds have been an omnipresent threat since the beginning of the dream, slowly becoming more and more of a problem. The dreamer has attempted to rid himself of this problem, notably when he caught and beat one to death in a rage. Defoe, the dreamer's projection of his banished persona, warned him that the seagulls are possessed with the souls of those who have been drowned. To kill a seagull, then, is to become haunted forever by that soul. As we have established, Ephraim Winslow was drowned. This is then a second avenue through which the dream is indicating that Tommy has been possessed by the spirit of Winslow. Pattinson has connected his killing of Winslow to his predicament with the birds as they devour him. Perhaps he feels as though it is a kind of karmic justice and that he deserves his fate. As he faded into delirium and into the dream, he has unconsciously transformed this feeling into the symbolic reality of the attacking birds. Also, the fact that his identity in the dream is not his own, but that of Ephraim Winslow, further goes to this point. As the birds, who he has identified with the avenging spirit of Winslow, devour his body, the spirit of Winslow is also devouring his mind. Birds, like many of the other symbols in this film, are creatures of a dual nature. In their case, they inhabit the earth and the skies. In as such, they can be seen to inhabit both the real world and the dream, just as our dreamer does, making them a through line of the story. The link between what is real and what is fantasy. The Promethean imagery is still quite curious, though. Why is the dreamer cast into this role of the fire thief, and why is his crime analogous enough to suffer the same punishment? The crime of Prometheus was not simply the theft of fire, but it was the upsetting of the ordered world by giving the power to humanity. In empowering humanity, he gave them the potential ability to supplant Zeus from atop the hierarchy, just as Zeus had toppled Kronos, and Kronos Uranus. As king of Olympus, Zeus can be seen as the pinnacle of the natural hierarchy. While the other gods hold power over elements of nature, Zeus held power over the gods themselves. To read this psychologically, we could see Zeus as the ego ruling over the other aspects of our self, choosing which parts to allow into the conscious persona and which parts ought to be banished into the shadow. When the trickster part, here represented as Prometheus, overtook the ego and committed an act that the ego itself would find unacceptable, it created a rift in the internal hierarchy, just as the gift of fire to humanity created a rift into the divine hierarchy. With the murder of Winslow, the persona that our dreamer's ego had been propping up as the internal ruler was shaken and lost its place atop the hierarchy. As such, a psychological complex was built to contain the old persona, and a battle ensued in the unconscious over which new identity would take precedence. To build a psychological complex is often a protective mechanism for the individual who cannot psychologically cope with the reality of their situation. To find out that one is capable of murder is not an easy realization on its own, as it would naturally conflict with the ego's generally good view of itself. The dream is a refuge from reality where he can hide from himself and his agony, denying even his identity to hide from the avenging Winslow's soul. In looking into the light, our dreamer is recalled unto himself. If the dream maker is kind, this is also a symbol of his release from torment and into death, as he has literally gone into the light.